But when the outlaws came for blood and fire, Abigail Hale became the only thing standing between a town's judgment and its salvation. This is the story of a widow who walked into the wilderness with nothing but her name and rode back through hell with everything to lose. A stolen horse, a guarded rancher, and one choice that would either bury her in the dust or carve her legend into the unforgiving frontier. Stay until the end. Like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The town didn't have a name worth remembering, just another collection of weathered wood and broken promises squatting at the edge of Wyoming territory, where the railroad hadn't bothered to reach, and decent people knew better than to stay. Abigail Hale stood at the far end of what passed for a main street, a canvas bag hanging from one shoulder and dust settling into the creases of her mourning dress like it had already claimed her. She was 32, looked 40, felt 100. "You sure about this, Mrs. Hale?" The wagon driver shifted on his bench, not quite meeting her eyes. He'd been paid to bring her this far, and not a mile further. "Ain't nothing out that way but rocks and regret." Abby pulled the bag higher. "Then I'll fit right in." He grunted, slapped the reins, and left her standing in a cloud of alkali dust that coated her tongue and burned her throat. She didn't watch him go. There wasn't any point in looking back, not at the wagon, not at the life she'd scraped together in Kansas, not at the husband who'd died owing money to men who didn't forget and didn't forgive. The sun hammered down like a judgment she hadn't asked for but was getting anyway. She started walking. The valley opened up 3 miles west, carved between ridges of red stone that looked like broken teeth. Sagebrush sprawled across the floor in twisted clumps, and the creek that was supposed to run year-round had shriveled to a trickle that barely wet the rocks. The line shack crouched in the shadow of the northern ridge. 4 walls, a sagging roof, and a door that hung crooked on leather hinges. It was the ugliest thing she'd ever been grateful for. Abby dropped her bag inside and stood in the doorway, breathing hard. The interior smelled like mouse droppings and old smoke. A rusted stove squatted in one corner. A wooden frame that might have been a bed leaned against the far wall. The window was just a gap in the logs, no glass, no shutter. She sat down on the dirt floor and put her face in her hands. Didn't cry, couldn't afford it. Water was precious. By the time the sun started its slow dive toward the mountains, she'd swept out the worst of the debris, patched the door with a strip of canvas torn from her bag, and started a small fire in the stove using dried sage and a handful of kindling she'd gathered from the creek bed. The smoke didn't draw right, the chimney was half blocked with an old bird's nest, but it was heat, and heat meant survival. She had 2 cans of beans, a small sack of cornmeal, a tin cup, a knife. That was it. That was everything between her and starvation. Abby opened one of the cans with the knife, ate half, and saved the rest for morning. Then she lay down on the bare wood frame and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of Simon, her husband, the man who'd promised her a future and delivered a grave. When she woke, the stars were still out and the fire had died to ash. The first week passed in a haze of thirst and silence. She learned the shape of the valley, where the creek pooled deep enough to drink from, where the best sage grew for burning, where the rattlesnakes liked to sun themselves on the flat rocks. She set a snare made from wire she'd pulled out of the shack's walls and caught a rabbit on the 4th day. Skinned it, roasted it, ate every scrap, even the parts that made her stomach turn. No one came. No one even knew she was there. That was the idea. On the 8th day, she found the canyon. It split off from the main valley like a scar, narrow and deep, the walls pressing in so close that the sunlight barely touched the bottom. Abby followed it because she had nothing better to do and because the creek seemed to run stronger here, fed by some hidden spring further up. She walked for an hour, boots scuffing on smooth stone, until the canyon opened into a small basin ringed by cottonwoods. And that's where she saw the horse. It was standing in the shade, head low, one back leg cocked at an angle that wasn't right. A mare. Dark bay, almost black with a blaze down her face and white socks on both hind legs. Beautiful, even half dead. Abby stopped moving. The mare's ears swiveled toward her, but she didn't run, couldn't. The leg was swollen just above the hock, and there was a gash along her shoulder still weeping fluid. She'd been out here a while, days maybe, long enough to get weak. Abby took a slow step forward. Easy. The mare snorted and shifted, favoring the bad leg. "Easy," Abby said again. She kept her voice low, steady, non-threatening. She'd grown up around horses. Her father had run a freight business back in Missouri before the war ruined him, and she knew that tone mattered more than words. She moved closer, 10 feet, 5. The mare's nostrils flared and her eyes rolled white, but she didn't bolt. Abby crouched down and waited, just sat there in the dirt, not looking directly at the horse, letting her presence settle. Minutes passed. The cottonwoods rustled overhead. A jay screamed somewhere up the canyon. Finally, the mare lowered her head and blew out a long breath. Abby stood slowly, took another step, and reached out. The mare let her touch her neck. "There you go," Abby murmured. Her fingers found the gash on the shoulder. Deep, but not fresh. Infected, though. She could smell it. "Someone did a number on you, didn't they?" The mare shuddered under her hand. Abby ran her palm down the mare's back, over her ribs. Too thin, coat dull, dehydrated. She moved to the injured leg and crouched again, fingers gentle on the hot, swollen joint. "You get caught in a fence, or did someone—" She stopped. There was a mark on the mare's hip, a brand. She brushed the dirt away and felt her stomach drop. Bar M. She knew that brand. Everyone within 100 miles knew that brand. Colt Mercer's ranch. Abby sat back on her heels and looked at the mare. "You're stolen, aren't you?" The mare just stared at her with dark, exhausted eyes. "Or you ran off. Or someone ran you off." She rubbed her face. "Either way, you're worth more than me, and that's saying something." She should have walked away. Should have left the horse where she found it and pretended she'd never seen a damn thing. Getting mixed up with Colt Mercer, even by accident, was a good way to end up worse than broke. But the mare was dying, and Abby knew what it felt like to be left behind. She stood, brushed the dirt off her skirt, and made a decision that would crack her life wide open. "All right," she said. "Let's see if you can walk." Bunk. Getting the mare back to the line shack took most of the day. Abby moved slow, one step at a time, letting the horse set the pace. Every 50 yards she stopped and let the mare rest. The injured leg barely held weight, and twice the mare stumbled so badly that Abby thought she'd go down and not get back up. But she did. Every time. Stubborn. By the time they reached the shack, the sun was setting and Abby's shirt was soaked through with sweat. She tied the mare to a post outside, using a length of rope she'd scavenged from the shack's debris pile, then went to the creek and filled her tin cup 6 times, bringing water back and letting the mare drink until she finally stopped gulping. "That's enough for now," Abby said. "You'll founder if you drink too fast." The mare lipped at her shoulder, searching for more. Abby pushed her nose away gently. Later. She went inside, dug through her bag, and pulled out the last thing of value she owned, a small tin of salve her mother had made years ago. Honey, lard, and pine resin. It smelled terrible and probably didn't do much, but it was all she had. She cleaned the gash on the mare's shoulder with creek water and a strip of cloth, packed the wound with salve, and wrapped it as best she could. Then she checked the leg again. Still hot, still swollen, but no break that she could feel. Probably a sprain, maybe a torn tendon. It would heal, or it wouldn't. "You're going to have to want it," Abby told her. "I can't do this part for you." The mare flicked an ear. Abby smiled despite herself. "Yeah, I'm talking to a horse. That's where I'm at." She unsaddled her. Someone had left a worn saddle and bridle on her, both covered in dust and cracked leather, and rubbed her down with handfuls of dry grass. The mare stood quiet, eyes half closed, too tired to fight. When Abby was done, she stepped back and looked at her. "You need a name." The mare blinked. Abby tipped her head back and stared at the sky. The stars were just starting to appear, bright and cold and impossibly far away. One of them, brighter than the rest, hung just above the western ridge. "Starlight," she said. "That work for you?" The mare didn't answer, but Abby decided it was close enough. 3 days passed. Abby rationed the last of her beans and cornmeal, mixing it with water to make a thin gruel that kept her belly from eating itself. She spent most of her time with Starlight, changing the bandage, walking her in slow circles to keep the leg from stiffening, talking to her like she was a person instead of livestock. "I had a husband once," Abby said on the second night, sitting in the dirt with her back against the shack wall. Starlight stood nearby, head low, resting. Simon. He was a gambler, not a good one, but he thought he was. Always one game away from the big score, you know? Starlight's ear swiveled toward her. He died in a back room in Abilene. Someone put a bullet in him over a poker hand. They came to me after, said he owed money. A lot of it. Told me I had two choices, pay it or work it off. She laughed, bitter and low. Guess which one they wanted? The mare shifted, testing her weight on the bad leg. I ran instead, Abby continued. Took what I could carry and got on a train. Didn't matter where it was going, long as it was away. Ended up here. She looked at the stars again. Middle of nowhere. Edge of nothing. Starlight blew out a soft breath. You probably don't care, Abby said, but it helps to say it out loud. Makes it feel less like I'm disappearing. The mare's eyes drifted closed. Abby stood, brushed the dust off her skirt, and went inside to sleep. Quote, on the fourth day, Starlight walked without limping. Not much, just a few steps, but it was enough to make Abby's chest tighten with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. There you go, she whispered, running a hand down the mare's neck. Knew you had it in you. Starlight tossed her head and nickered, and for the first time since Abby had found her, she looked like a horse instead of a ghost. That night, Abby sat outside the shack and stared at the eastern horizon. Out there, somewhere beyond the ridge, was the Bar M Ranch, Colt Mercer's land, the place this horse had come from. She could keep her. No one knew she was here. No one would come looking. But that wasn't the point. Abby had spent her whole life being invisible, being overlooked, being left behind. She'd run from men who wanted to own her, and she'd survived on scraps and silence. But keeping this horse, this stolen, wounded, stubborn mare, would make her exactly what those men had always said she was. A thief. And Abby Hale was a lot of things, but she wasn't that. She stood, dusted off her skirt, and made the second decision that would change everything. All right, Starlight, she said. Let's go meet the man who owns you. The Bar M Ranch sat in a wide valley 20 miles east, sprawling across grassland that actually looked green instead of dead. Abby had heard about it in the nameless town, how Colt Mercer ran 2,000 head of cattle and 50 horses, how he'd built the place from nothing after the war, how he didn't suffer fools or thieves or anyone who thought they could take what was his. She also heard he didn't smile much and didn't trust easy. Perfect. It took her 2 days to get there, leading Starlight on foot because the mare still couldn't handle a rider, and Abby didn't have a saddle worth using anyway. They followed the creek east until it joined a larger tributary, then cut north along a wagon road that looked like it saw regular use. On the second afternoon, she saw the ranch. It was bigger than she'd expected. A main house built from timber and stone, a massive barn, corrals that stretched out in every direction, bunkhouses for the hands. Horses grazed in the near pasture, sleek and healthy, nothing like the half-dead wreck she'd pulled out of the canyon. Abby stopped at the edge of the property and took a breath. This is stupid, she said to Starlight. You know that, right? The mare bumped her shoulder with her nose. Yeah, I know. Too late now. She started walking. She made it halfway to the barn before a man stepped out to meet her. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than bone. He wore a faded blue shirt, dusty trousers, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. His eyes, gray, cold, measuring, locked onto her and didn't let go. Colt Mercer. Had to be. He stopped 10 feet away and hooked his thumbs into his belt. You lost? Abby lifted her chin. No. Then you're trespassing. I'm returning your horse. His gaze flicked to Starlight, and something shifted in his expression. Not softness, nothing that easy, but recognition. Surprise, maybe. He stepped closer, ran a hand down Starlight's neck, checked the brand on her hip. Where'd you find her? Canyon west of here. She was in bad shape. He looked at the bandage on Starlight's shoulder, the way the mare stood easy next to Abby instead of shying away. You patch her up? Best I could. Why? Abby blinked. What? Why bring her back? He straightened and fixed her with that cold stare again. You could have kept her, sold her. No one would have known. I'd have known. He studied her for a long moment, and Abby had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing straight through her skin into all the ugly, desperate parts she'd been trying to hide. Finally, he nodded. "What's your name?" "Abigail Hale." "You got people around here, Mrs. Hale?" The "Mrs." hit like a slap, but she didn't flinch. "No." "Where you staying?" "Line Shack, West Valley." His jaw tightened. "That's my land. Didn't see a sign. Didn't need one." They stood there, neither one backing down, and Abby felt something crack open inside her chest. Something sharp and reckless and tired of bending. "I brought your horse back," she said quietly. "If that's not enough, then tell me what is." Colt's eyes narrowed. Then, to her surprise, he turned and called toward the barn. "Ezra." A younger man, lean, sandy-haired, probably not yet 20, jogged over. He glanced at Abby, then at Starlight, and his face lit up. "Holy hell, boss, that's... I know what it is," Colt said. "Take her to the barn. Check her over. Make sure she's fed and watered." "Yes, sir." Ezra took Starlight's lead rope, grinning. "Good to see you, girl. Thought we lost you for good." He led the mare away, and Abby was left standing alone with Colt Mercer and the weight of his silence. "You hungry?" he asked finally. She was. She was starving, but admitting it felt like losing something she couldn't afford to lose. "I'm fine." That wasn't the question. Abby's hands curled into fists. "I said I'm fine." Colt's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Come up to the house. We'll talk." He turned and started walking, and Abby stood there, furious and confused and too damn tired to know what to do next. Then her stomach growled loud enough to hear. She cursed under her breath and followed him. The inside of the house was clean and spare, wooden floors, simple furniture, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. A woman in her 50s stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven. She looked up when they entered, took one look at Abby, and frowned. "Colt, who's this?" "Mrs. Hale. She brought Starlight back." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "The mare you lost last month?" "Same one." She set down her spoon and wiped her hands on her apron, eyes sharp and assessing. "Sit down, girl. You look half dead." Abby bristled. "I'm fine." "You're skin and bones. Sit." There was no arguing with that tone. Abby sat. The woman, her name was May, she said, housekeeper and cook, put a plate in front of her. Stew, thick with meat and potatoes and carrots, bread on the side, still warm. Abby's throat tightened and she had to blink hard to keep her vision clear. "Eat," May said. Abby ate. Colt sat across from her, arms crossed, watching. Not talking, just watching. Finally, when she'd finished half the plate and her hands had stopped shaking, he spoke. "You know anything about horses?" Abby looked up. "Some? Some like you read about it, or some like you've worked with them?" "Worked? Where?" "Missouri. My father ran freight." "He teach you?" "He didn't have a choice. I was all he had." Colt leaned back in his chair. "Starlight's been gone a month. Took off during a storm, got tangled in wire, tore herself up trying to get free. We looked for her. Figured she was dead by now. She almost was. But you kept her alive." "She kept herself alive. I just helped." He nodded slowly. "I'm short a wrangler. Lost one to a broken leg. Another quit last week. You interested?" Abby's fork clattered onto the plate. "What?" "You heard me. You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't steal my horse when you had the chance. I know you've got skills I need. That's enough. I'm a woman. I noticed. Your men won't like it. My men will do what I tell them, or they'll find work somewhere else." He stood, pushed his chair back. "You want the job or not?" Abby stared at him, heart hammering. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd been trying to avoid. Being seen, being noticed, being close enough to people that they could hurt her. But it was also food, shelter, a chance. "I want it," she said. Colt nodded. "You start tomorrow. May'll show you where to bunk. Don't make me regret this." He walked out, and Abby sat there with an empty plate and a future she hadn't seen coming. May poured her a cup of coffee and set it down with a knowing look. "Welcome to the Bar M, girl. Try not to get yourself killed." Abby picked up the cup and took a sip. It was the best coffee she'd ever tasted. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. The bunkhouse smelled like leather and sweat and tobacco smoke that had seeped into the wood over years. May had led Abby to a small room at the far end, barely more than a closet with a cot, a trunk, and a window that didn't close all the way. But it had a door that latched and a roof that didn't leak. Abby set her canvas bag on the trunk and sat down on the cot, testing the springs. They creaked, but held. Through the thin wall, she could hear voices. Men's voices. Low and rough, talking over each other. Heard Mercer hired a woman. Bull, he wouldn't. May told me herself, said she's the one who brought Starlight back. So? That don't mean she can wrangle. Guess we'll find out tomorrow. Laughter followed, mean and sharp, and Abby closed her eyes and breathed through her nose. She'd expected this. She'd known it was coming the second Colt had made the offer, but knowing didn't make it easier to swallow. She lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling until the voices faded and sleep dragged her under. Morning came too early. Someone banged on her door before dawn, shouting that breakfast was in 10 minutes, and if she wasn't at the table, she didn't eat. Abby dressed in the dark, same worn skirt, same blouse, boots that were more whole than leather, and stepped outside into air so cold it burned her lungs. The main house glowed with lamplight. She crossed the yard, gravel crunching under her feet, and pushed open the door. 6 men sat around a long table, shoveling eggs and biscuits into their mouths like they hadn't eaten in days. They looked up when she entered, forks pausing midair, and the room went quiet. May stood at the stove, spatula in hand. "Sit down, girl. Food's getting cold." Abby took the empty chair at the end of the table, farthest from everyone else. One of the men, older, with a gray beard and a scar running through his left eyebrow, slid a plate toward her without a word. She nodded her thanks and kept her eyes on her food. "Name's Dutch," the man said. His voice was gravel and whiskey. "Foreman." "Abigail." "I know." He sipped his coffee. "You ever work cattle?" "Horses, mostly. Horses don't pay the bills, cattle do." "Then I'll learn." He grunted and went back to his eggs. The other men exchanged glances but didn't say anything. Not yet. They were waiting. Watching. Colt walked in just as Abby finished her plate. He poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter, and looked at Dutch. "She's with you today. Start her on the yearlings." Dutch's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. "Yes, sir." Colt's eyes flicked to Abby. "Don't fall off." Then he left. Abby set down her fork and stood. "Where are the yearlings?" Dutch pushed back from the table. "Follow me." The sun was just cresting the eastern ridge when they reached the corral. A dozen young horses milled inside, restless and skittish, too green to be useful and too wild to ignore. Dutch leaned on the fence and nodded toward them. "These need halter breaking. Think you can handle it?" Abby climbed over the fence and dropped into the corral. The yearlings scattered to the far side, ears pinned, eyes rolling. She stood still and waited. Dutch crossed his arms. "Any day now." She ignored him, kept her breathing slow. Let the horses settle. After a minute, one of them, a leggy sorrel colt with a crooked blaze, took a cautious step toward her. Then another. Abby didn't move. The colt stretched his neck, nostrils flaring, and sniffed her shoulder. She lifted her hand slowly and let him smell that too. When he didn't bolt, she touched his neck. "Easy," she murmured. "You're all right." Behind her, Dutch made a sound that might have been approval. By midday, she'd haltered 3 of the yearlings and led them around the corral without getting dragged or trampled. Her arms ached and her hands were blistered, and she was pretty sure she'd wrenched her shoulder when one of them spooked and nearly yanked her off her feet, but she didn't stop. Dutch watched the whole time, chewing a piece of straw, not saying much. Finally, when the sun was high and brutal, he called her over. "That's enough for today." Abby climbed out of the corral and wiped the sweat off her face with her sleeve. "They need more work." "They'll get it. You need water before you pass out." He handed her a canteen and she drank, the water so cold it hurt her teeth. When she lowered it, he was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You ain't half bad," he said. "Thanks. Don't let it go to your head. The boys are going to test you, probably already planning something." "Let them." Dutch's mouth twitched. "You got spine. I'll give you that." He took the canteen back. "Come on. Mercer wants to see you." Abby's stomach dropped. Why? Didn't say. Just said to bring you when you were done. She followed him across the yard to the barn, where Colt stood in the center aisle, running a brush over Starlight's coat. The mare looked better already, eyes brighter, coat starting to shine, the wound on her shoulder scabbing over clean. She nickered when she saw Abby. Colt glanced up. She's looking for you. Abby stepped closer and Starlight pushed her nose into her chest, huffing softly. She scratched behind the mare's ears and felt something tight in her chest loosen. She's doing well, Colt said. You're taking good care of her. So did you. He set the brush aside. Dutch says you're holding your own. Dutch talks too much. Dutch doesn't talk unless he means it. Colt's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. You planning to stick around, or is this just a stop on your way somewhere else? Abby's hand stilled on Starlight's neck. Why does it matter? Because I don't waste time training people who won't be here next month. I'll be here. You sure about that? She wasn't, not really, but she lifted her chin and said it anyway. I'm sure. He nodded once. Good. There's a mare in the back stall, bay with a white star. She's got an abscess in her hoof. Think you can handle it? I can try. Then get to it. He walked past her, boots echoing on the barn floor, and Abby stood there with Starlight's breath warm against her neck and the weight of his expectations settling on her shoulders like a yoke she hadn't asked for but was carrying anyway. The bay mare was mean. She pinned her ears the second Abby approached and tried to bite her twice before Abby even got the halter on. But Abby had worked with worse. Her father's freight horses had been half wild and twice as ornery, and she knew how to be patient. She tied the mare to the post, ran a hand down her leg, and picked up the hoof. The abscess was ugly, hot, swollen, oozing. The mare jerked her leg back, and Abby nearly got kicked in the ribs. Hold still, she muttered. The mare snorted and stomped. Abby tried again. This time she got the hoof trimmed and the abscess drained, packed it with the same honey salve she'd used on Starlight, and wrapped it tight. By the time she was done, her shirt was soaked through and her hands were shaking. She stepped back and looked at the mare. You're welcome. The mare flicked her tail and went back to eating hay. That night, Abby sat outside the bunkhouse with a plate of stew May had brought her, watching the stars come out one by one. The air was cooling fast and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She thought about Simon, about the life she'd left behind, about how easy it would have been to just disappear into the wilderness and let the world forget she'd ever existed. But she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The door creaked open behind her and Ezra stepped out, hands in his pockets. He was the youngest of the ranch hands, still green enough to smile at her instead of glare. Mind if I sit? Abby shrugged. It's your porch. He sat down on the steps, elbows on his knees. For a minute, neither of them spoke. Then Ezra cleared his throat. You did good today, with the yearlings. Dutch tell you that? Didn't have to. I watched. Abby glanced at him. You spying on me? Just curious, he grinned. We don't get a lot of women around here, especially ones who can handle a horse without getting thrown. I got thrown plenty when I was learning. Yeah, but you got back on. That's the part that matters. He picked at a splinter in the wood. The guys are going to give you hell, you know. I know. Don't take it personal. They're just testing me. I know that too. Ezra nodded. For what it's worth, I think you'll do fine. Thanks. He stood, brushed the dust off his pants, and went back inside. Abby finished her stew and sat there a while longer, letting the silence settle around her like a blanket. She didn't know if she belonged here yet, didn't know if she ever would. But for the first time in months, she had a roof over her head and food in her belly, and work that didn't make her feel like she was disappearing. That was enough. For now. The next week passed in a blur of aching muscles and blistered hands, and late nights spent collapsing onto her cot too tired to dream. Abby worked the yearlings every morning, helped Dutch and the others move cattle in the afternoons, and spent her evenings in the barn, tending to horses that needed shoeing or doctoring or just a steady hand. The men didn't make it easy. They gave her the worst jobs, mucking stalls, hauling water, fixing fence in the places where the wire was so tangled it took hours to clear. They forgot to tell her when they moved the herd to a different pasture, left her standing in an empty field for half the morning. One of them, a stocky man named Rafe with a missing tooth and a chip on his shoulder, put a burr under her saddle before she rode out one day. She found it before she mounted, held it up, and looked him dead in the eye. "You want me gone that bad," she said. "Tell Mercer yourself." Rafe's face went red, but he didn't say a word. After that, the prank stopped. Not because the men liked her, most of them still didn't, but because she'd proven she wasn't going to break. Dutch started giving her harder tasks. Horses that bucked, cattle that didn't want to be moved, fences that needed riding in the far pastures where you didn't see another soul for hours. Abby took it all without complaint, and slowly, grudgingly, the men started to respect her. Not warmth, not friendship, just respect. It was more than she'd expected. Colt, though, was a different story. He didn't talk to her much, didn't acknowledge her except to give orders or ask about the horses she was working with. But she felt him watching, not in a way that made her skin crawl, just in a way that made her aware, like he was measuring her against some invisible standard and deciding whether she'd come up short. It set her teeth on edge. One afternoon, she was in the barn brushing down a gelding when Colt walked in. He stopped a few stalls down and started checking tack, and Abby kept working, ignoring him. "That mare with the abscess is sound again," he said without looking at her. "Good. You did a decent job with her." Abby paused mid-stroke. That was the closest thing to a compliment she'd heard from him since she'd started. She didn't know what to do with it. "Thanks," she said finally. He moved to the next saddle, running his hand over the stitching. "Dutch says you're ready to start working the green horses." "If he thinks so. I'm asking what you think." She turned to look at him. He was watching her now, those gray eyes sharp and unreadable, waiting. "I think I can handle it," she said. "All right, you start tomorrow." He left before she could respond, and Abby stood there with the brush in her hand, feeling like she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. The green horses were younger, wilder, harder to predict. Abby spent hours in the round pen, working them in circles, teaching them to respond to pressure and release, to trust the weight of a saddle and the feel of a bit. It was slow, frustrating work, and more than once she got dumped hard into the dirt, but she got back up. Every time. One morning, she was working a gray filly that had more fire than sense. The filly, spooked at a shadow, bolted across the pen and slammed into the fence so hard the rails shook. Abby grabbed the lead rope and hauled her back, talking low and steady until the filly's breathing slowed. When she looked up, Colt was leaning on the fence, arms crossed. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine. That filly's got a mean streak. She's scared, not mean. There's a difference." He tilted his head, studying her. "You always this stubborn? You always this nosy?" His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." He pushed off the fence and started to walk away, then stopped and looked back. "You're doing good work, Abby." She blinked. He'd never used her first name before. It sounded strange coming from him, personal. "Thanks," she said. He nodded and kept walking, and Abby turned back to the filly, her heart beating a little faster than it should have been. That night she lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, replaying the way he'd said her name. It shouldn't have mattered. It didn't mean anything, but it stuck in her head anyway, stubborn and unwelcome. She rolled over and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. It didn't. The weeks bled into a month, and Abby started to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Settled. Not safe. She was too smart to believe in that, but settled. Like maybe this place could hold her for a while without collapsing under her weight. She ate breakfast with the men every morning, worked until her hands were too sore to grip the reins, and fell into her cot every night too tired to think. It was hard, brutal work, but it was hers, and that mattered. May started leaving extra biscuits on her plate. Ezra asked her advice about a horse he was training. Even Dutch cracked a smile once when she managed to get a particularly stubborn steer into the pen without losing her temper. But the real shift came on a Saturday afternoon when Colt called her into his office. The room was small and cluttered, papers stacked on the desk, maps pinned to the walls, a rifle leaning in the corner. Colt sat behind the desk, pen in hand, ledger open in front of him. He looked up when she knocked. "Close the door," he said. She did, and stood there, waiting. He set the pen down. "I'm sending a crew into town tomorrow to pick up supplies. I want you to go with them." Abby frowned. "Why?" "Because you've been here over a month and you haven't left the ranch once. You need boots that don't have holes in them and a coat that'll actually keep you warm. I'm fine. You're not. He stood, walked around the desk, and leaned against it. I pay my workers. You've earned wages. Use them. She wanted to argue, but he was right. Her boots were falling apart, and her coat was so threadbare it barely blocked the wind. She hated admitting she needed anything, but pride didn't keep you warm at night. All right, she said. Good. Dutch will take you. Be ready at dawn. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Abby. She looked back. You've earned your place here. Stop waiting for someone to take it away. The words hit harder than she expected. She nodded, throat tight, and left before he could see how much it shook her. The next morning, she climbed into the wagon next to Dutch and two other hands, Rafe and a quiet man named Tom, and they headed east toward town. The ride took most of the day, the wagon creaking over ruts and rocks, the sun climbing higher until it felt like it was sitting directly on top of her head. Dutch didn't talk much, but Rafe made up for it, complaining about the heat and the dust and the fact that they had to haul supplies instead of doing real work. Tom just smoked his pipe and stared at the horizon. When they finally rolled into town, Abby felt her chest tighten. It wasn't the same nameless place she'd been dropped off at months ago, but it was close enough. Same dusty streets, same suspicious stares, same feeling that she didn't belong. Dutch handed her a small pouch of coins. Get what you need. We leave in 2 hours. She took the pouch and headed for the general store. Inside it was dim and cool, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric. The man behind the counter looked her up and down, eyes narrowing. Help you? I need boots, she said. And a coat. He pointed toward the back without a word. Abby found a pair of boots that fit well enough and a wool coat that was heavier than anything she'd owned in years. She brought them to the counter, set them down, and counted out the coins. The man took them, still watching her like she might bolt with the merchandise. You new around here? Just passing through. You working at the bar M? She hesitated. Yes. His expression shifted, not friendly, but less hostile. Mercer's a good man. Doesn't hire trash. He wrapped the boots and coat in brown paper. You tell him Frank says hello. I will. She took the package and walked out into the street, breathing easier. The 2 hours passed quickly. Dutch and the others loaded the wagon with sacks of grain and flour, crates of nails and tools, a few bottles of whiskey that May had ordered. Abby stood off to the side, holding her package, watching the town move around her. And that's when she saw him. A man leaning against the wall of the saloon, hat pulled low, eyes fixed on her. He was tall, lean, with a scar running down the side of his face and a gun belt that looked well used. Something about the way he watched her made her skin crawl. She turned away and climbed into the wagon. Ready? Dutch asked. Yeah, let's go. They pulled out of town and headed west, the sun starting its slow descent toward the mountains. Abby glanced back once, and the man was still there, still watching. She didn't say anything, didn't know what to say, but unease settled in her gut and didn't leave. That night, back at the ranch, she sat on the porch steps and pulled on her new boots. They were stiff and uncomfortable, but they didn't have holes. She wrapped the new coat around her shoulders and felt the weight of it, solid and real. Ezra walked by and stopped. New gear? Yeah. Looks good? Feels strange, he laughed. You'll get used to it. She hoped he was right. Inside, through this window, she could see Colt sitting at the table, talking with Dutch. His profile was sharp in the lamplight, all angles and shadows. He looked tired, older than she'd thought when she first met him. As if he felt her watching, he turned his head and their eyes met through the glass. Neither of them looked away. Finally, Abby stood, pulled the coat tighter, and went inside to sleep. She didn't see the man from town again. But she didn't forget him either. The man with the scar showed up at the ranch 3 days later. Abby was in the round pen working a chestnut gelding when she heard the horse approaching. She looked up and her hands went still on the lead rope. Same lean build, same hat pulled low, same gun belt that looked like it had seen too much use. He reined in at the fence and tipped his hat, mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. Morning? Abby didn't answer, just stood there, every muscle in her body coiled tight. Colt came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw the man, and his expression went hard. Derek. Colt, The man, Derek, dismounted and looped his reins over the fence. Been a while. Not long enough. Colt's voice was flat. What do you want? Just came to talk, friendly-like. We got nothing to talk about. Derek's eyes slid past Colt and landed on Abby. He looked at her for a long moment, head tilted like he was trying to place her. Then his smile widened. That the woman who brought your mare back? Colt stepped into his line of sight. I said, what do you want? Heard you've been losing horses. Thought I'd offer my services. I don't need your services. You sure about that? Because word is, you lost 3 more last week. Good stock, too. That's a lot of money walking off your land. Abby's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard about any missing horses. Colt hadn't mentioned it, but the way his jaw tightened told her it was true. I'll handle it, Colt said. Will you? Derek leaned against the fence, casual, like they were discussing the weather. Because from where I'm standing, looks like you got a problem you can't fix. Lucky for you, I got eyes and ears all over this territory. I could help you track down whoever's taking what's yours. For a price. Everything's got a price, Colt. You know that. Colt's hand drifted toward his hip, and Derek's smile sharpened. Easy, Derek said. I'm not here to cause trouble, just making an offer. He glanced at Abby again. Real generous of you, by the way, taking in strays. Didn't know you had such a soft heart. Get off my land, Colt said quietly. Derek pushed off the fence and climbed back onto his horse. Think about it. Offer stands for another week. After that, he shrugged. Well, horses are tricky things. Easy to lose, hard to find. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after he was gone. Abby walked over to the fence, still holding the lead rope. Who was that? Colt stared after him, jaw working. Trouble. That's not an answer. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something close to anger in his eyes. Not at her. At the situation. At Derek. At himself. Derek Voss, he said, runs a gang out of the Badlands north of here. Rustlers, thieves, killers when it suits them. He's been trying to get a foothold in this valley for years. And you think he's the one taking your horses? I know he is, just can't prove it. Abby's grip tightened on the rope. So what are you going to do? Nothing. Nothing? He wants me to hire him, wants me to pay him to stop stealing from me. The second I do that, he owns me, and I don't get owned. He walked back toward the barn, shoulders stiff, and Abby stood there watching him go, a cold knot forming in her chest. That night, the bunkhouse was quiet. The men sat around playing cards, voices low, tension humming under every word. Abby sat on her cot, mending a tear in her shirt, listening. Heard Voss came by today, Rafe said. He did, Dutch replied. Colt sent him packing. For now, but if we keep losing stock, we're not hiring that snake. Mercer's made that clear. Then we better figure out how to stop the bleeding ourselves. Tom knocked ash out of his pipe. Hard to stop what you can't see. Whoever's taking those horses knows the land, knows our routines, probably been watching us for weeks. Abby's needle slipped and jabbed her thumb. She stuck it in her mouth and tasted copper. You think it's someone on the inside? Ezra asked, voice dropping even lower. I'm not saying that, but it's worth considering. Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Rafe cleared his throat. What about her? Abby's head snapped up. Dutch's chair scraped against the floor. Watch it. I'm just saying, she shows up out of nowhere, brings back a horse we thought was lost, and suddenly we're bleeding stock? That's convenient. That's stupid, Dutch said. She's been working her tail off since she got here. You've seen it. I've seen her get real friendly with the horses, real familiar with the layout. Knows where everything is now. Abby set down her mending and stood. The room went quiet. You got something to say to me, Rafe? She asked. He looked at her, face flushed. Just making an observation. Then observe this. I don't steal. I don't lie. And I sure as hell don't sabotage the only place that's given me a chance in months. She stepped closer. You don't like me? Fine. But don't you dare accuse me of something I didn't do just because you're scared. Scared? He stood, towering over her. Of what? Of whoever's actually doing this. Because it's easier to blame me than admit you don't have a clue who it is. For a second, she thought he might swing at her, His fists clenched and his breathing went short and sharp. But Dutch stepped between them, hand up. "That's enough, both of you." Rafe spat on the floor and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Abby sat back down, hands shaking. Ezra gave her a sympathetic look but didn't say anything. Tom just smoked his pipe and stared at the wall. Dutch pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Don't let him get to you. He's spooked, that's all." "He's not the only one," Abby said quietly. "No, but he's the only one dumb enough to say it out loud." Dutch leaned back. "For what it's worth, I don't think you had anything to do with this." "Thanks. But you should know, people are going to talk, and talk turns into rumors, and rumors turn into something uglier." "I know." He nodded and stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But sleep didn't come easy. Abby lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the men breathe and shift in their bunks. Her mind kept circling back to Derek Voss. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd smiled. He was setting something in motion. She could feel it. The next morning, Colt called a meeting in the barn. All the hands gathered, leaning against stalls or sitting on hay bales, waiting. Colt stood in the center, arms crossed, face unreadable. "We lost 3 horses last week," he said. "Good ones. Worth a lot of money. Whoever's taking them knows what they're doing. They're not amateurs." "You think it's Voss?" Tom asked. "I know it's Voss, but knowing and proving are 2 different things." Colt's eyes swept the room. "From now on, we double the night watch. 2 men on rotation. No one rides out alone. And if you see anything, you report it to me or Dutch. Understood?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. "One more thing," Colt said. "There's been talk. Accusations. I'm going to say this once. If I catch anyone spreading rumors or pointing fingers without proof, you're done here. I don't care how long you've worked for me. We stick together or we fall apart. Your choice." He let that hang in the air for a moment, then dismissed them. Abby stayed behind pretending to check a saddle. When the others had filed out, Colt walked over. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." "Rafe give you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle." He studied her. "You sure about that?" She looked up at him, tired and angry, and something else she didn't want to name. "What do you want me to say, Colt? That I'm scared? That I don't know if I belong here? I already know that. I've known it since the day I showed up." "That's not what I asked." "Then what are you asking?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm asking if you trust me." The question caught her off guard. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that this place, this man, could be different from everything else that had let her down. But trust wasn't something she gave easily. Not anymore. "I'm trying to," she said finally. "That's fair." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I trust you." He walked out before she could respond, and Abby stood there in the empty barn, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just been given something precious or something dangerous. The days that followed were tense. The men moved in pairs, eyes scanning the horizon, hands never far from their guns. Abby worked the horses, kept her head down, and tried to ignore the way some of them watched her when they thought she wasn't looking. Ezra still smiled at her. Dutch still treated her fair. But Rafe and a few of the others kept their distance, and she could feel the weight of their suspicion like a hand on her back, pushing her toward the edge. Then, on a cold morning 2 weeks after Derek's visit, the rumors exploded. Abby was mucking out a stall when she heard raised voices outside. She dropped the pitchfork and stepped into the aisle, just as Rafe burst through the barn door, face red, finger pointed at her. "It's her! I'm telling you, it's her!" Dutch was right behind him. "Shut your mouth, Rafe." "No, I saw her last night, out by the north pasture, alone." Abby's stomach turned to ice. "I was checking the fence. Colt asked me to." "Convenient," Rafe sneered. "Real convenient. And this morning, 2 more horses are gone." The air went out of the barn. Even Dutch looked shaken. "That true?" he asked. 2 more gone?" Rafe nodded. Tom found the gate open, fresh tracks leading north. "Right where she was last night." Abby's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't take those horses." "Then why were you out there alone?" "I told you. Colt asked me to check the fence." "Colt didn't ask you to do anything," a voice said from the doorway. Abby turned. Colt stood there, expression carved from stone. Her heart stopped. "I didn't assign anyone to check that fence," Colt said slowly. "Not last night. The world tilted. Abby opened her mouth, but nothing came out. So either you're lying, Colt continued, or someone told you to go out there. No one told me. She stopped, thought back. She'd been working in the barn, finishing up for the night, when someone had mentioned the north fence needing attention. But who? She couldn't remember. It had been casual, offhand. She'd just assumed. Who told you? Colt's voice was quiet, dangerous. I don't know. I can't remember. Rafe laughed, bitter and mean. Of course you can't. I'm not lying, Abby said, voice shaking. I swear, I didn't take those horses. Colt's eyes bored into hers, searching, looking for something. She didn't know if he found it. Get out of the barn, he said finally. Colt, I said get out. She stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for him to say something else, to defend her, to tell the others they were wrong. But he didn't, and that silence hit harder than any accusation. Abby walked past him, past Rafe's satisfied smirk, past Dutch's troubled frown. She walked across the yard, past the bunkhouse, past the corrals, kept walking until the ranch was a smudge behind her and the valley opened up wide and empty. Then she stopped, bent over, and tried to breathe through the rage and hurt clawing up her throat. She'd been a fool, an idiot. She'd let herself believe that this place could be different, that she could be different, that someone might actually see her as more than a liability or a mistake waiting to happen. But Colt had hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything she needed to know. She straightened, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and looked at the horizon. She could leave, pack her bag, take what little she'd earned, and disappear. It's what she was good at, what she'd always done. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the memory of Starlight, half dead in that canyon, refusing to quit even when every reason said she should. Abby turned and started walking back toward the ranch. She wasn't running, not this time. By the time she reached the bunkhouse, the sun was setting. She pushed open the door and found Ezra sitting on his bunk, head in his hands. He looked up when she entered. Abby, don't, she said. Just don't. They're wrong about you. Doesn't matter what they think. It matters what Colt thinks. She grabbed her bag and started shoving her few belongings inside. Colt made his choice. He's just being careful. You can't blame him for that. I can blame him for not trusting me when I needed him to. Ezra stood. Where are you going? Line shack, same place I was before all this. You can't go back there. It's not safe. Safer than here. He grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. Please, just wait. Give him a chance to figure this out. He had his chance. She pulled free and slung the bag over her shoulder. Tell May I said thanks for the food. She walked out into the twilight, boots crunching on gravel, and didn't look back. The line shack was exactly as she'd left it, cold, empty, smelling like dust and loneliness. Abby dropped her bag on the floor, lit a small fire in the stove, and sat down with her back against the wall. She'd been here before. Alone, unwanted, invisible. At least this time she'd chosen it. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards and whistling through the gaps. Abby closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't let her. She kept seeing Colt's face, the way he'd looked at her, the doubt. She'd trusted him, and he'd thrown it back in her face. Hours passed. The fire died down. The cold crept in. And then just before dawn, she heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant but growing closer. Abby stood and moved to the window, peering out into the gray light. A group of riders, maybe 5 or 6, moving fast across the valley floor, heading east, toward the Bar M. Her breath caught. She grabbed the old spyglass she'd found in the shack weeks ago and focused on the riders. Even in the dim light, she recognized the leader, Derek Voss, and behind him, tied together and being driven hard, were at least a dozen horses. Abby's heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't a raid. This was an attack. Voss wasn't just stealing horses anymore. He was coming for the ranch itself. She had 2 choices. Stay here, stay safe. Let Colt deal with the consequences of his doubt, or go back. Her hands tightened on the spyglass. She thought about Starlight, about May's kindness, about Ezra's loyalty, about Dutch's gruff respect. She thought about Colt's voice when he'd said, I trust you. Before he'd stopped, Abby dropped the spyglass, grabbed her coat, and ran. The sun was just breaking over the eastern ridge when she crested the hill above the ranch. Below, she could see the riders closing in, could see the ranch hands scrambling, unprepared, caught off guard. She needed a plan, needed something that would give them a fighting chance. Her eyes swept the valley and landed on the canyon to the west, the one where she'd found Starlight, the one that opened into a network of ravines and hidden trails. And beyond that, in the high country, was the wild horse herd she'd spotted weeks ago. Hundreds of them, untamed and unpredictable. A wild idea took shape in her mind. It was reckless, probably suicidal. But it was all she had. Abby turned and ran toward the canyon, legs burning, lungs screaming. She didn't think, didn't question, just moved. She hit the canyon at a dead sprint, boots slipping on loose rock, and climbed. Higher, faster, until she reached the ridge where the wild herd grazed. They were there, dozens of them, mares, colts, a few young stallions, watching her with wary eyes. Abby picked up a rock and threw it hard, shouting at the top of her lungs. The herd spooked, wheeled, started to run. She chased them, screaming, waving her arms, driving them toward the ridge, toward the ranch. The thunder of hooves shook the ground. And Abby ran with them, heart pounding, knowing that she was about to either save everyone she cared about or get them all killed. The wild herd poured over the ridge like a breaking wave, hooves striking rock and dirt in a rhythm that sounded like war drums. Abby ran alongside them, lungs burning, vision blurring at the edges, but she didn't slow down, couldn't. The momentum of the stampede pulled her forward, and if she fell now, she'd be trampled into nothing. Below, the ranch yard spread out like a chessboard, and she could see it all unfolding. Derek Voss and his men had already breached the corrals, guns drawn, driving the stolen horses toward the north gate. The ranch hands were scattered, some diving for cover behind water troughs and fence posts, others running for the barn where the rifles were kept. Colt stood in the center of it all, revolver in hand, shouting orders that were swallowed by gunfire. Abby angled the herd toward the gap between the barn and the main house, using her voice and her body to push them where she needed them to go. The lead mare, a gray with wild eyes and a scarred shoulder, seemed to understand, or maybe she just wanted to run, and the rest followed. The herd hit the ranch yard like a flood. Chaos erupted. Voss's men wheeled their horses around, shouting, trying to get out of the way, but there was nowhere to go. The stampede crashed through the corrals, scattering the stolen horses, smashing through fence rails like they were made of kindling. One of Voss's riders got thrown when his mount spooked and bolted sideways. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Yet Abby veered left, cutting through the edge of the herd, and sprinted toward the barn. She could see Dutch crouched behind a wagon, rifle raised, firing at one of Voss's men who was using the water trough for cover. She could see Ezra dragging Tom toward the bunkhouse, Tom's leg bleeding, face pale. And she could see Colt standing his ground near the main house, reloading his revolver with hands that moved too fast to follow. Derek Voss saw him too. Voss spurred his horse forward, cutting through the stampede with reckless confidence, gun raised. He fired once, twice, bullets kicking up dirt near Colt's boots. Colt fired back and Voss jerked to the side, but he didn't fall, didn't even slow down. Abby's heart seized. She changed direction, running flat out, ignoring the burn in her legs and the stitch in her side. She was too far away, too slow. Voss was closing in and Colt had his back to the house with nowhere to go. Voss raised his gun again, taking aim. Abby screamed Colt's name, but the sound was lost in the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire. Then Starlight appeared. The mare came out of nowhere, cutting across the yard at a dead run, black coat slick with sweat, eyes rolling white. She slammed into Voss's horse broadside and both animals went down in a tangle of legs and screaming. Voss hit the ground and rolled, losing his gun, and Starlight scrambled to her feet, wild and furious. Colt spun around, gun raised, and froze when he saw Abby sprinting toward him. "Get down!" she shouted. He dropped just as one of Voss's men fired from the barn loft. The bullet whined past where Colt's head had been a second before and punched into the house wall. Abby dove behind the water trough and Colt rolled in next to her, breathing hard. "What the hell are you doing here, what?" he demanded. "Saving your life, looks like." "I told you to leave. You told me to get out of the barn." "I did." She risked a glance over the trough. Voss was on his feet again, blood running down the side of his face, limping toward his horse. "We need to end this now or they'll regroup and come back worse." Colt looked at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he nodded. Dutch! Ezra! North side! Dutch's voice came back, rough and steady. On it! Gunfire erupted from the barn as Dutch and two other hands laid down cover. Voss's men scattered, some retreating toward the north gate, others trying to grab the stolen horses that were now mixed in with the stampeding wild herd. It was bedlam. No one could tell which horses belonged to who anymore. Abby grabbed Colt's arm. The canyon trail. If we can drive them that direction, they'll be boxed in. No way out except back through us. That's a narrow pass. They'll see it coming. Not if we come from behind. He stared at her. You know another way in? I know every trail in that valley. I had nothing but time for 2 months. Colt's jaw worked. Then he whistled sharp and high. Dutch looked over and Colt made a series of hand signals. Dutch nodded and started moving, pulling the other hands with him. Come on, Colt said to Abby. Stay close. They ran low and fast, using the chaos as cover, circling wide around the corrals and cutting west toward the ridge. Behind them, the gunfire was tapering off as Voss's men realized they were losing ground. Abby heard Voss shouting orders, heard the sound of horses being whipped into motion. They were retreating, but not fast enough. Abby led Colt up a narrow trail she'd discovered weeks ago, barely wide enough for one person, that switchbacked up the ridge and came out above the canyon mouth. It was steep and treacherous, and her boots kept slipping on loose shale, but she didn't stop. Colt stayed right behind her, close enough that she could hear his breathing, hard and controlled. They reached the top just as Voss and his remaining men funneled into the canyon below, driving a mixed group of stolen and wild horses ahead of them. There were 4 men left, maybe 5. Harder to tell in the dust and confusion. Colt dropped to one knee and pulled his rifle from his shoulder. How many you count? 4. No, 5. One's lagging behind. Dutch is coming up the other side. When I give the signal, we pin them in the middle. Abby crouched next to him, heart hammering. She didn't have a gun. Hadn't even thought to grab one. All she had was a knife on her belt that she used for cutting rope, and not much else. Colt glanced at her. You should get back. Not a chance. Abby, I started this. I'm finishing it. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, shook his head. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. Despite everything, his mouth twitched. Then his expression went hard again, and he raised the rifle. When I fire, get down and stay down. She nodded. Below, Voss reined in his horse and looked back, scanning the ridge. For a second, his eyes seemed to lock onto exactly where they were hiding. Abby held her breath. Then Dutch's voice rang out from the opposite ridge. Drop your guns. Voss spun his horse around. His men did the same, caught between Dutch's position and the canyon walls. Trapped. You got nowhere to go, Derek, Dutch shouted. Make this easy on yourself. Voss's laugh echoed off the stone. You think I'm scared of you, old man? You should be. I got 4 guns and you got what? 3? 4? Maybe that woman if she's dumb enough to stick around. Voss's smile was visible even from a distance. Tell you what, you let us ride out of here with what we came for and nobody else gets hurt. You got my word. Your word ain't worth spit, Dutch said. Voss shrugged. Then I guess we do this the hard way. He drew his gun. Colt fired. The shot cracked like lightning and Voss jerked sideways, clutching his shoulder. His horse reared and he nearly went off, grabbing the saddle horn at the last second. His men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks, and Abby flattened herself against the ground, arms over her head. Colt worked the bolt and fired again. One of Voss's men toppled from his saddle. Another wheeled his horse and tried to break for the canyon mouth but ran straight into Dutch's line of fire. The horse screamed and went down, throwing the rider into the rocks. 2 men left, plus Voss. Voss was shouting something, gesturing wildly, and his remaining men kicked their horses forward, charging straight up the canyon toward Dutch's position. It was suicide. They had to know it was suicide. But they did it anyway. Dutch and his men opened up and the canyon filled with smoke and the sharp smell of gunpowder. One of Voss's men went down. The other made it 10 more yards before his horse stumbled and he flew over its head, hitting the ground in a sprawl of limbs. That left Voss. He sat on his horse in the middle of the canyon, blood soaking through his shirt, gun still in his hand. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Voss raised the gun and pointed it at Dutch. Colt stood up. Derek. Voss turned, and in that split second, Abby saw his intention, saw the way his hand shifted, the way his eyes narrowed. He wasn't aiming at Colt. He was aiming at her. She tried to move, but her body was too slow, still pressed against the rocks, and there was nowhere to go anyway. The canyon wall was behind her. The drop was in front. She was pinned. Colt stepped in front of her. The gunshot was deafening. Colt staggered back, hand going to his side, and Abby lunged forward and caught him before he fell. His weight nearly took her down, but she braced her legs and held on, lowering him to the ground. "No," she said. "No, no, no." "I'm all right," he grunted. "Just get down." Another shot rang out and rock exploded inches from her head. Abby threw herself over Colt, covering him with her body, and heard Dutch's rifle bark 3 times in rapid succession. Silence. She lifted her head. Down in the canyon, Voss was on the ground, horse standing over him, reins dangling. He wasn't moving. Dutch's voice echoed through the canyon. "It's done! Hold your fire!" Abby looked down at Colt. His face was pale, jaw clenched, hand pressed tight against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "How bad?" she asked, voice shaking. "Bad enough." He tried to sit up and hissed through his teeth. "Help me up. You need to stay still. I need to make sure my men are alive." He grabbed her arm and pulled, and she didn't have the heart to fight him. She got her shoulder under his and hauled him to his feet, staggering under his weight. They made their way down the trail, slow and painful, Colt's breathing getting harsher with every step. By the time they reached the canyon floor, Dutch was there, rifle slung over his shoulder, face grim. "Boss," he said. "How many?" Colt asked. "Voss and 4 of his men, all down. We got 2 wounded on our side, Tom and Rafe. Tom's leg is bad, but he'll live. Rafe took a graze to the head, knocked him cold." "The horses?" "Scattered to hell and back. It'll take us days to round them all up." Dutch's eyes flicked to Abby, then back to Colt. "She saved our asses. You know that, right?" Colt nodded, wincing. "I know." Ezra came running up, face smudged with dirt and powder burns. "Boss, you're hit." "I noticed." "We need to get you to the house. May's got supplies. I'm fine." "You're bleeding through your shirt," Abby said flatly. "You're not fine." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was no wall in his eyes, no guardedness, just exhaustion and pain and something that looked almost like gratitude. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go." They made the slow walk back to the ranch, Colt leaning heavily on Abby, Dutch and Ezra flanking them. The yard was a disaster. Broken fence rails everywhere, scattered gear, a few dead horses that would need to be dealt with. But the house was standing, the barn was standing, and the men were alive. May met them at the door, took one look at Colt, and pointed toward the kitchen table. "Sit." He sat. May started cutting away his shirt, while Abby stood to the side, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. She couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was draining out of her all at once, and leaving nothing but cold and exhaustion in its wake. May glanced at her. "You hurt?" "No." "Then make yourself useful. Get me hot water and clean rags." Abby moved on autopilot, pumping water into a pot, setting it on the stove, finding the rags in the cupboard. Her hands felt disconnected from her body. Everything felt disconnected. She'd almost watched Colt die. He'd stepped in front of her, taken a bullet meant for her. Why? May worked quickly, cleaning the wound, packing it with cloth, wrapping it tight. Colt didn't make a sound, just sat there with his jaw locked and his knuckles white against the table edge. "Bullet went clean through," May said. "You're lucky. Another inch to the left and you'd be dead." "Feels lucky," Colt muttered. "Don't be smart." She tied off the bandage and stepped back. "You need rest. Real rest. Not your version where you work yourself into the ground anyway. I'll rest when the horses are rounded up. You'll rest now or I'll knock you over the head and make you." May's eyes were steel. "I mean it, Colt." He sighed and nodded. Dutch appeared in his doorway. "Town's sending the sheriff out. Should be here by tomorrow morning. They'll want statements." "Fine." Colt's eyes found Abby. "You should get cleaned up. You look like you ran through hell." "I did." The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. "Yeah, you did." May shooed everyone out except Abby, And Abby stood there in the kitchen, still shaking, still trying to process what had happened. May poured her a cup of coffee and pressed it into her hands. Drink. Abby drank. It was hot and bitter and exactly what she needed. He would have died if you hadn't come back, May said quietly. I didn't come back for him. No? I came back because it was the right thing to do. May studied her for a long moment. You keep telling yourself that, girl. Abby didn't answer, just drank her coffee and tried to ignore the way her heart was still racing. Later, when the sun was setting and the ranch had settled into an exhausted quiet, Abby found herself in the barn. Starlight was in her stall, nickering softly, and Abby went to her, pressing her forehead against the mare's neck. You saved him too, she whispered. You know that? Starlight huffed and lipped at her hair. Abby closed her eyes and let herself breathe. Just breathe. Footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Colt standing in the doorway, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, face pale but steady. You shouldn't be up, she said. Probably not. He walked over slowly, carefully, and leaned against the stall door. I owe you an apology. Abby's throat tightened. You don't owe me anything. I do. I doubted you, when I should have trusted you. He looked at her, eyes clear and unflinching. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw his apology back in his face and tell him it was too late, but she was too tired, and he looked too sincere. Why'd you step in front of me? She asked. Because I wasn't going to let you get shot. You barely know me. I know enough. He was quiet for a moment. You came back. Even after everything, even after He stopped, shook his head. You came back. That tells me everything I need to know. Abby's eyes burned. She blinked hard. I didn't know what else to do. You could have run. Most people would have. I'm not most people. No. His voice was soft. You're not. They stood there in the dim light of the barn, the silence stretching between them, and for the first time since Abby had arrived at the Bar M, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like she was standing exactly where she was supposed to be. Colt reached out, hesitated, then touched her hand. Just briefly. Just enough. Thank you, he said, for everything. Abby nodded, not trusting her voice. He turned and walked back toward the house, moving slow, and Abby watched him go, something fragile and terrifying blooming in her chest. That night she lay on her cot in the bunkhouse, listening to the men breathe. Ezra was snoring softly. Tom was muttering in his sleep. Even Rafe, bandaged and bruised, was quiet. Tomorrow the sheriff would come. There would be questions, paperwork, consequences. But tonight, the ranch was safe. The horses were coming home. And Abby wasn't alone. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't dream of running. The sheriff arrived just after dawn, riding in with 2 deputies and an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He was a heavy man with a thick mustache and tired eyes, the kind who'd seen enough trouble to know it never really ended, just changed shape. Abby was in the barn mucking stalls when she heard the horses. She set down the pitchfork and walked to the door, wiping her hands on her pants. Colt was already in the yard, moving slower than usual, one hand pressed to his side. May stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching. The sheriff dismounted and nodded to Colt. Mercer. Sheriff Dawson. Heard you had some excitement out here. Dawson's eyes swept the yard, taking in the broken fences, the trampled ground, the dark stains in the dirt that hadn't quite washed away. Voss? Voss and 4 of his men, all dead. Dawson's jaw worked. You sure about that? Derek Voss has been a thorn in my side for 3 years. I want to see the body myself. Dutch'll take you to the canyon. We left them where they fell. Figured you'd want to verify. Damn right I do. Dawson glanced at his deputies. You 2 stay here. Take statements. He looked back at Colt. I'll need yours too. And anyone else who was involved. Colt's eyes flicked to Abby, standing in the barn doorway. Mrs. Hale was involved, more than anyone. Dawson turned, really seeing her for the first time. His expression shifted, something between surprise and suspicion. That right? Abby stepped forward, lifting her chin. It's right. She's the one who stampeded the wild herd, Colt said, broke up Voss's attack, saved lives, Dawson's eyebrows climbed. A woman stampeded a wild herd? You got a problem with that, Sheriff? May's voice cut across the yard like a whip. Dawson held up his hands. No, ma'am. Just surprised is all. He looked at Abby again, slower this time, measuring. I want to hear the whole story, from the beginning. Abby nodded. I'll tell you whatever you need to know. Dutch led Dawson and one of the deputies toward the canyon, while the other deputies started interviewing the ranch hands. Abby sat on a bench outside the barn and waited her turn, watching Colt talk to the deputy, his voice steady despite the pain he had to be in. When the deputy finally called her over, she told him everything. How she'd seen Voss and his men heading toward the ranch. How she'd driven the wild herd down from the ridge. How the fight had unfolded. She didn't leave anything out. Didn't try to make herself sound braver or smarter than she'd been. Just told the truth. The deputy wrote it all down in a small notebook, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he looked up. That's quite a story, Mrs. Hale. It's what happened. I'm not saying I don't believe you, but a woman running down a stampede to save a ranch she'd only been working at for a few weeks? He tapped his pencil against the notebook. Some folks might find that hard to swallow. Some folks can think whatever they want, Abby said. I know what I did. The deputy studied her for a moment, then closed the notebook. Fair enough. Sheriff will probably want to talk to you again when he gets back, but you're free to go for now. She stood and walked back to the barn, feeling the weight of eyes on her back. The ranch hands were scattered around the yard, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Rafe stood near the corral, bandage wrapped around his head, jaw tight. When Abby passed him, he spoke. I was wrong about you. She stopped, turned. What? I said I was wrong. He didn't look happy about it, but he said it anyway. You didn't steal those horses, and you could have let Voss tear this place apart, but you didn't. So, I was wrong. Abby didn't know what to say. An apology from Rafe was the last thing she'd expected. She settled for a nod. Thanks. He grunted and turned away, and Abby kept walking, something loosening in her chest. Ezra jogged over, grinning despite the exhaustion written all over his face. You hear? They're calling you a hero in town. They don't even know what happened yet. Word travels fast. Dutch told someone told someone else, and now half the valley thinks you single-handedly took down Derek Voss. He laughed. Give it a week and they'll be saying you wrestled a bear too. I didn't do it alone. Yeah, but you're the one who came back when you didn't have to. That's what matters. Abby wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She just shook her head and went inside the barn, needing a moment alone. Starlight was waiting in her stall, ears pricked forward. Abby walked over, and the mare pushed her nose into Abby's chest, huffing softly. We made a mess, didn't we? Abby murmured, scratching behind the mare's ears. But we're still here. That counts for something. Starlight's eyes drifted closed, content, and Abby leaned against her and breathed. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dawson returned from the canyon. His face was grim but satisfied. He found Colt in the house, May fussing over his bandages, and Abby lingering in the doorway. It's Voss, Dawson said, and his men, all accounted for. I'll need to file a report, but as far as I'm concerned, this was self-defense. You and your people did what you had to do. Colt nodded. What about the horses he stole? We found most of them mixed in with your stock. You'll need to sort through and see what's yours, what's wild, and what might have come from other ranches. But that's your problem, not mine. Dawson pulled off his hat and rubbed his head. Voss had a bounty on him, $200, dead or alive. That's yours, Mercer. Split it among my men. They earned it. You sure? I'm sure. Dawson nodded and looked at Abby. Mrs. Hale, I owe you an apology. When I first heard the story, I thought maybe folks were exaggerating, but I talked to Dutch, talked to your men, and they all said the same thing. You're the reason this ranch is still standing. Abby's throat tightened. I just did what needed to be done. That's more than most people can say. He put his hat back on. You ever need anything? You come find me. I mean that. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Dawson left with his deputies, and the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet. The men went back to work, rounding up the scattered horses, repairing fences, cleaning up the mess. Abby joined them, falling into the rhythm of labor, grateful for something to do with her hands. But the tension wasn't gone. Not completely. That night, as the sun set and the men gathered for dinner, there was a knock on the main house door. May answered it and found a group of townspeople standing on the porch. A dozen, maybe more. Men and women Abby didn't recognize, holding lanterns, faces uncertain. Colt came to the door, wincing as he moved. "Can I help you?" One of the men stepped forward, hat in his hands. "Mr. Mercer, we heard what happened, heard about Voss, and we heard about the woman who helped you stop him." Colt's expression didn't change. "What about her?" "Some of us, we heard rumors about her being involved with the thefts, and we wanted to say we were wrong." Abby appeared in the hallway behind Colt, and the man's eyes found her. He looked embarrassed, ashamed. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "we owe you an apology. We believed the lies Voss was spreading, believed them without question. That was wrong." A woman stepped forward, older, with kind eyes. "My husband lost 2 horses to Voss last year. We couldn't prove it, couldn't do anything about it. But you stopped him. You gave us justice when no one else could. Thank you." More voices joined in, agreeing, apologizing, thanking her. Abby stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do with any of it. Colt's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "You hear that?" he said quietly. "You're not invisible anymore." She wanted to tell him she didn't need their thanks, didn't need their validation. But the truth was, it mattered. It mattered more than she wanted to admit. "Thank you," she said finally, voice rough. "I appreciate it." The townspeople lingered a few more minutes, offering help with repairs, bringing food May hadn't asked for but accepted anyway. Then they left, and the porch was empty again. Colt turned to her. "You all right?" "I don't know what I am." "That's fair." He smiled just a little. "Come on, May made stew." They ate together at the big table, the ranch hands crowding in, telling stories about the fight, exaggerating details, laughing in that rough way men do when they've survived something they shouldn't have. Abby sat between Ezra and Dutch, listening, and for the first time she felt like she was part of the conversation, instead of just existing on the edges of it. Rafe raised his glass. "To Mrs. Hale, the toughest damn woman in Wyoming territory." The men cheered and drank, and Abby's face went hot. She stared at her plate, embarrassed and touched and completely overwhelmed. Colt caught her eye across the table and mouthed, "You earned it." She nodded and looked away before he could see how much that meant. The days that followed were strange. Normal, but different. The work was the same, horses to train, fences to fix, cattle to move, but the way people looked at her had changed. The ranch hands treated her like one of them. No more testing, no more doubt, just respect. The townspeople started nodding to her when she rode into town with Dutch to pick up supplies. A few even called her by name. But the biggest change was Colt. He wasn't distant anymore, wasn't guarded. He talked to her more, asked her opinion on things, trusted her with responsibilities he'd only given to Dutch before. And sometimes, when they were working in the barn or sitting on the porch after a long day, she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. One evening, 2 weeks after the fight, Abby was brushing down Starlight when Colt walked in. He'd healed well, the bandages gone, though he still moved carefully when he thought no one was looking. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous." His mouth twitched. "Probably is." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "You've been here almost 3 months now, and in that time you've proven yourself 10 times over. You're good with the horses, better than anyone I've got, and you're tougher than half my men. Is there a point to this? I want to make you foreman." Abby's hand stilled on Starlight's coat. "What?" "Dutch is getting older. He's been talking about stepping back, taking it easier. I need someone I can trust to handle the horses and help run this place. And that's you." She turned to look at him, searching his face for a joke, for doubt, for anything that would tell her this wasn't real. But he was serious. "Colt, Before you say no, hear me out. I know it's unconventional. I know some people won't like it, but I don't care. You've earned this, and if anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with me." Abby's chest tightened. A few months ago, she'd been invisible, starving, alone, and now this man was offering her a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why what? Why do you trust me? After everything, after doubting me?" Colt stepped closer, his eyes steady. "Because you came back. Because when everyone else would have run, you turned around and fought. And because I've seen who you are, Abby, I see you, and I'm not letting you disappear." Her throat burned. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." She looked at Starlight, at the barn that had become more of a home than anywhere she'd ever lived, at the man standing in front of her offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. "Yes," she said. "I'll do it." Colt's smile was slow and genuine, the first real one she'd seen from him. "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's something else." "What?" "I want you to move into the main house. There's a room on the second floor, bigger than that closet you've been sleeping in. May's already got it ready." Abby's eyes widened. "Colt, I can't." "You can, and you will. You're not just a ranch hand anymore, Abby. You're part of this place, part of—" He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Just say you'll think about it." She nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. That night, she lay in her cot for the last time, staring at the ceiling, and thought about how far she'd come. From the line shack where she'd nearly starved, to the ranch where she'd found purpose, to this moment where she was being offered not just a job, but a place to belong. The next morning, she packed her bag and moved into the main house. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the valley. May had left fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Abby sat on the bed and let herself cry. Not from sadness, from relief. Over the following weeks, she settled into her new role. Dutch taught her the parts of the job she didn't know, managing payroll, dealing with suppliers, planning the seasonal work. The men adjusted, some faster than others, but they adjusted. And Abby proved, day after day, that Colt's trust hadn't been misplaced. She worked harder than anyone, rode out before dawn to check the herds, stayed up late balancing ledgers, made decisions that needed to be made and stood by them even when they were unpopular. And slowly, the ranch began to thrive again. One evening in late autumn, as the first snow dusted the mountains, Abby stood on the porch watching the sun set. The valley was quiet, peaceful, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Colt came out and stood beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she took it, grateful for the warmth. "Cold tonight," he said. "Getting colder." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, and Abby realized this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not safety, exactly. Not invisibility. Just a place where she was seen for who she was and valued for what she could do. "You ever think about leaving?" Colt asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Old habits." "What stops you?" She looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who doubted her, then trusted her, then stood in front of a bullet for her. The man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "You," she said. "This place. The people. I finally found something worth staying for." Colt set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle it made her heart stutter. "I know I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings, but I need you to know something." "What?" "You changed everything, Abby. From the moment you walked onto this ranch with that mare, you changed everything, and I don't want to go back to how it was before. I don't want to imagine this place without you." Her breath caught. "Colt, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just needed you to know." She set down her own cup and stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "What if I'm ready?" His eyes searched hers, and she saw hope there, cautious and fragile. "Are you?" "I'm tired of running," she said. "I'm tired of being alone. And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel something for you." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was something precious that might break. And Abby kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into that moment, all the fear and hope and gratitude and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name yet, but felt all the same. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight. Stay." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it. Winter came hard that year, but the Bar M was ready. The horses were healthy and strong. The cattle had been moved to lower pastures, the fences were repaired, and the people who called the ranch home had become something more than coworkers. They'd become family. Abby stood in the barn on a cold December morning, watching starlight nuzzle a new foal that had been born just before dawn. The mare was gentle, patient, nothing like the half-dead creature Abby had found in the canyon all those months ago. "She's a good mother," Colt said, appearing beside her. "She's a survivor," Abby said. "Just needed someone to give her a chance." He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Sounds familiar?" Abby leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the cold. "You ever regret hiring me?" "Not once. Even when I caused a stampede?" "Especially then." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved us, Abby. In more ways than one." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "We saved each other." And it was true. She'd arrived broken and invisible, and he'd been closed off and alone. But together, they'd built something neither of them could have built on their own: trust, partnership, home. May called from the house